Okay, welcome back. I hope you had a great break. I hope you ate some ice cream or, I don't know, learned how to jump rope or something. And here's the second part of week seven's class, which I'm calling You Like to Hear About the Bauhaus, but I'd rather talk about manufacturing. Part two is manufacturing. I ended part one with this combination of images: the transcendently beautiful Luckard chair, the apex of all possible cantilevered chrome tubular steel European modernist sensibility construction. And on the right, Nathan George Horowitz, I think, bastardized version of those ideas for American consumers. That's what we want to do now. Let's look at what happened in America when we learned from what the people at the Bauhaus were doing, but added layers of other thinking onto it. There was an exhibition at Macy's called Art and Trade in 1927, which was co-sponsored by the Met, the museum in New York. And it was the first large department store exhibit in New York City that showcased modern American design. Over 50,000 people went to see it in the week-long display, and staff from the Met trained Macy's employees to be able to talk about these objects. And this is the first time American design is really trying to be American. All of the things we did in the Art Deco period, we're looking at other cultures, we're looking at France, and in the 1930s, we became much more interested in exploring what an American aesthetic might be. Also, we knew a lot about manufacturing here. We totally figured out bicycle making in America, so we had the technology to work with tubing. In an effort to avoid buying tubing from overseas, Pope Bicycles started its own tubing manufacturing plant. So we were really ready to take on tubing and apply it to new uses. In the Art Deco lecture, I introduced Donald Desky, and I talked about how he was determined to introduce American Art Deco to America when he went to Paris and saw the 1925 exposition. And I showed you Radio City Music Hall and some of the things that he designed in the Art Deco style. But he's coming back into this story because he's a really big part of how America learned to like new materials. Desky was hired by Ypsilanti Reed Furniture Company in 1928 to redesign their rattan furniture. I have not been able to find the details of this story. I don't know if they hired him specifically to change what they were doing and bring in a whole new thing, or if he said, I'll show you how to do new designs in rattan, but I'm going to call it chrome and formica. Nevertheless, he got Ypsilanti Furniture producing a line of tubular steel furniture, which debuted as the Ypsilanti Fleckrom line. I don't think this is a smart use of tubing. He's got welds, he's got a big thing that has to be chromed all at once, but it is the new aesthetic. And I'm sorry for these pictures. They're cell phone pictures from a museum exhibition because I have not been able to find these documents anywhere. But this is the Ypsilanti catalog that shows the very earliest chrome tubular steel furniture that they were producing in 1929, so right at the same time that it was happening at the Bauhaus, just a couple of years later. A 1930 Ypsilanti ad said that they had pioneered steel furniture in America, and in less than 2 years had assumed outstanding leadership in style and quality in this singular furniture. So this is definitely not Bauhaus purity. This is not simple geometry. It's nowhere near as graceful as the things we looked at in the first half. But there's an effort to look at what is actually manufacturable, and as a result could be made more affordably and made profitable. So if the enemy is joints and fussy fitting of parts, the table on the right is actually short pieces that are bolted together. The table on the upper left really intrigues me because it's square tubing. So square tubing is more difficult to support when you're bending it, and the inside of the bend will end up collapsing a little bit. Square tubing gives you a reference surface, so it's going to be easier to bend it accurately, and as a result you can make the parts faster and less expensively, but you have to then live with that compressed surface. For Marcel Breuer, that might not have been acceptable, but for Donald Desky, that was a small price to pay to make something that was more affordable. Desky got a commission designing new pieces for a really amazing Edward Durrell Stonehouse in Bedford Hills, New York. Ypsilanti put some of those pieces into production. So some of them were custom made for the house, some were prototypes for the house that were produced, and some of the pieces in the collection in the house were from the regular production line. And these pieces, to me, seem as confident as anything that Marcel Breuer created. And two worlds collided in this house in a really interesting way. Richard Mandel combined the real stuff from Europe with the newer, less expensive things from America in this house. When his collection was auctioned, these Mart Stam chairs and this Donald Deskey table were living together as one suite. In addition to exploring how square tubing could improve manufacturing, Deskey was looking at other new materials. The chair on the left is covered in artificial leather, which is a PVC coating on fabric, much less expensive than leather, theoretically about as durable. And that was a new invention in the 1920s. The table on the upper right uses Formica for the top surface, which was a new material that used phenolic resin over printed paper. There were a lot of designers bumbling around with the same investigation of new materials and new aesthetics. Kem Weber had come to San Francisco to supervise work on the German pavilion at the Panama Pacific Exposition in 1915, and then World War I left him kind of stranded here. So lucky for us, he brought a European sensibility and a lot of woodworking skill to his early work. I love the chair on the left because it's wood, but it's desperately wishing that it weren't, right? Like that's a wooden chair that wants to be tubular steel. And conversely, I've never liked the chair on the upper right. That's his famous chair. The airliner chair is the famous one. It's cantilevered, but it's wood. So it's looking at new methods of construction, but using old materials, largely because that was the material he had available to him. You also will recognize his name because it's usually attached to the Zephyr clock, although there's some doubt as to whether he actually designed it. I did start to like this chair when I saw this image because I had no idea that it was a ready-to-assemble chair. It was sold in a box, knockdown, and you put it together yourself. It was not wildly successful. Disney ordered about 300 of them, but the chair never went into full production. So one reason it's so famous is it's quite rare. I prefer looking at Weber's metal furniture. I think aesthetically, it's a disaster. There is no purity of thought or form involved in these things, but there's a really clear investigation of opportunities. What if I make one part and use it twice for the arms of a chair? What if I combine tubing with rod? What if I make one part and repeat it 3 times and create speed lines at the bottom of the ottoman? They might not be sophisticated outcomes, but the explorations have a sophistication that I like. I also think it's interesting that once you figured out that you can have the same part used for both arms of a chair, you could just add extra chairs in between and call it a sofa. The chair on the right is his version of a single line chair. That's separate pieces of chrome attached to each other to make the one path around the whole chair, and all the structure is created by that one form. It's so telling when you put it next to the Marcel Breuer version and compare what the Bauhaus created and what was created for an American market. There's a lot of similarity, but there are a lot of differences. Weber also looked at using different metal for what it was good for. Maybe the cantilever could be bar stock if you wanted a chair that was a little bit springier, and then use tubing where you need tubing. Maybe where there needs to be a joint, instead of fitting things and welding them, you just smush the tubing and screw it together. I've just combined these desks to show you 2 things. How frequently this approach to a tubular steel desk recurs, but also to sort of contrast the high-end René Herbst welded and chromed version from France with the Marcel Breuer custom-made wooden insert drawer version from Germany, and then the American versions by Walter Darwin-Teague for Texaco with a metal cabinet and a laminate surface and chrome trim, and the Kem Weber version, which has essentially a metal filing cabinet as the drawer situation. So same object, similar use, but pretty different approach to how they should exist. Hey, it's me. I'm butting in. I'm sitting on my back porch. It's finally nice out, not raining. I'm editing the video, and I realized that last year I cut Wolfgang Hoffmann out to save time. But who cares about saving time now? Time is an elastic concept. So, I want to reinsert him. Wolfgang Hoffmann also worked in chrome tubular steel in America. If his name sounds suspiciously familiar, It's because, yes, his father was Josef Hoffmann, founder of the Wiener Werkstatt, whose writing I think you should have read in your homework assignments. At any rate, he came to America in 1925 to work for architect Joseph Urbans, and at the 1933 Century of Progress Fair, his work was seen by the owner of Howell Furniture Company, who hired him to design their new steel line. From 1934 to 1942, he designed all of it. It's reported to be hundreds of objects, but I can track down a mere handful. Here are some catalog pages from the first catalog in 1937 and an ad from a little bit later, 1940, to show you how like the Bauhaus originals some of this furniture is, but also how really not like. As with the other things we've looked at, it's all designed to be easier to make, more affordable. The catalog on the right says that the chairs sell for $9 or $12, which I know seems unbelievably inexpensive, but if you inflation calculator that, that's a verb. That's about $100 to $130 today, so they weren't free, but they were affordable. After he left, Howell became one of the companies responsible for the whole sort of explosion of dinette sets in the 1940s and 50s. That's a particularly American thing, the dinette set. And so Wolfgang Hoffmann might not have designed these. They're a little bit later, although he might have before he left. But certainly he's responsible for their DNA and what they turned into after he left. As a side note, since I'm already side noting, so this is side note in a side note, Wolfgang came to America in 1925 with his wife Pola. She had been a textile designer, and when they arrived in America, they did interior design work and furniture design work in New York City. They also designed a line of modernist ashtrays for the early American Pewter Company, which was a Boston-based manufacturer of colonial revival, so old-fashioned looking stuff, looking for a new direction. And these pieces are quite rare, but they do come up at auction. They are in a lot of museum collections. In fact, the piece on the lower right is at the Met in New York, which on its website can't be bothered crediting Pola for this and says it's just Wolfgang Hoffmann, but it's generally understood that they designed these together. They divorced in 1932, but Pola remarried and maintained her design practice for decades, becoming an important textile designer, producing fabrics under her own label, Pola Stout, and also for scores of fashion designers, and she worked all the way up until the early 80s. So there's a lot more to know about her, but I thought I'd insert a little bit right here. Okay, back to the regularly scheduled program. The real master of this equation is Gilbert Rohde. I'm going to try not to scare you with my enthusiasm for Rohde's work because I really admire his ability to combine high-end aesthetics with affordability. He began his career as a commercial illustrator in advertising, so he was good at drawing and he understood economics. He freelanced for ad agencies and large department stores. He drew furniture and interiors, so marketing was a part of his work from the beginning. Rohde took a 4-month trip to Europe in 1923. Unlike Desky and the people we looked at in earlier lectures who went to the 1925 Paris exposition, Desky was there before, in 1923, for 4 months, for a long time, and he visited Paris and he went to the Bauhaus in Germany. So he was right there where it was happening, when it was happening. When he came back, he was determined to be a designer, but a designer of modern goods. So unlike Desky, who wanted Art Deco stylistically, Rohde didn't have a style he wanted, he just knew he wanted to help invent the next thing. And I've paired a few of his designs with examples from Europe because I think it's clear that he was really looking for cues about how to proceed. The lamp on the left is an expensive French Art Deco piece. The lamp on the right is a less expensive American manufactured piece, and they share an awful lot of DNA. One of Rohde's early commissions was for Haywood Wakefield, a Boston manufacturer that specialized in wood furniture, and for them he produced over 100 new designs, which went into production and received wide critical acclaim. The Chicago Tribune wrote that the appeal of Rohde's modernism was in its conservatism. Nothing he does is startling or bizarre. And I know you're all thinking, man, if somebody said that about my work, I'd be offended. But their point was, you could introduce this into your home, and it's going to be friends with what you already have. You don't need to reinvent anything to be able to buy this new furniture. The furniture was relatively affordable. Tables were $35, side chairs were $6, $8 with arms. That's about $100 today for a chair. Just as an aside, if you think about Prohibition, this side table makes way more sense. It shows that you're studious and you read books, but when you want, you rotate the inside and you have access to glasses and booze and you can have drinky party time. Rhodey was one of the early American designers to use bent metal for furniture, and I think he was the best at it. His visit to the Bauhaus clearly gave him a confidence and a credibility when taking this material on. The chair on the left is similar to the Stamm chair and the Breuer chair. It's cantilevered, it's chrome tubular steel, but if you look at the construction details, the inserts are wood covered with artificial leather and just screwed in from the side. So the construction details are designed to be a little bit easier to navigate and less expensive to produce, but the aesthetic is close enough. It's also interesting to notice that Troy Sunshade Umbrella Company is producing this, because in America we didn't have Tonnet. An umbrella company would know how to use tubing. They might not know how to make a chair. And Gilbert Rhodey got involved helping them learn how to do that. If a true cantilever was too challenging an aesthetic for the masses, Rhodey was able to introduce like cantilever light. The back is cantilevered, but the seat's normal, don't worry. Troy Sunshade had offices throughout Europe, in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, and many of these designs made their way into the showrooms there. And I would love to know what the European designers thought when they saw this stuff. Because unlike Marcel Breuer, who was pursuing the ultimate expression of what tubular steel could do, Rhodey was looking for a sort of averaging of what it could introduce and what it could be used for. Rhodey was looking for a better average of what the new material could do and what people wanted or needed or would buy. So Marcel Breuer's drink cart is really, really exquisite and beautiful, with the asymmetry, with the chromed wheels, with the removable tray on top, and Rhodey's is merely serviceable, but it will still allow you to load up a drink tray in the kitchen and wheel it out to the pool. I'm showing you this pairing because it's rare to have an artist's illustration for a space and also a photograph of the space. It's also rare to be able to show you an actual drawing by any of the designers I've been talking about. This is a Gilbert Rhodey illustration for a chrome tubular steel piano and matching chairs. It was for an industrial art exhibit at the Met in 1934. Rhodey was amazingly prolific, and that's because there was real demand for this stuff. Possibly because it's 10 years later than it was when Breuer was trying to introduce his furniture, possibly because it was more affordable, possibly because Rhodey was so good at balancing the challenging new material with something more familiar, with making something that was also comfortable. Seeing all of his work in a row like this makes me realize, as with Ken Weber's work, that a lot of it is not very good, but you can start to see what the decisions were made. These are like sketches, where each one is an improvement over the last.
Hey, it's me again. I'm sorry to keep butting in. I can't stop myself. There's this stool called the Z stool, and if you Google it, everybody online says Gilbert Rhodey designed it, mostly because they just want to be able to sell it for more. But he didn't design it. He only designed stuff for Troy Sunshade for a couple of years, and this stool was made after. So who designed it? Probably Alice Louise Roth, an in-house designer at Troy Sunshade from the 30s all the way through the 50s. There when Rhodey started doing tubular steel, there way after when they were still making it, but not with any named designer. And that's part of the story of being an on-staff industrial designer. Okay, bye.
Rhodey's work for Troy Sunshade may not be great, but it did give him the experience for his next chapter to be a real expression of full maturity as a designer. In the same way that Rhodey had produced tasteful, consumable, understandable modern furniture for Hayward Wakefield, his next chapter at Herman Miller showed that he was really a master of how to introduce modernism to America. Rhodey went to Grand Rapids, Michigan, looking for new clients, and went into the offices at Herman Miller. He didn't know that Herman Miller at the time was in terrible financial straits. They had fewer than 100 employees, and in 1931 alone they had lost $30,000, which was a lot of money to lose in the Depression. What Herman Miller didn't realize is that Gilbert Rhodey had spent the whole day looking for work, and this was sort of his last stop. He was there late in the day. So it was actually kind of a perfect opportunity where Herman Miller figured they didn't have a lot to lose by trying a new thing, and Gilbert Rhodey had an opportunity to introduce comfortable modernism to a company that didn't know anything about it. If you look at the picture on the left, it's from the Herman Miller catalog before Gilbert Rhodey arrived. And if I had to describe that furniture, I'd be kind of at a loss for descriptors. It's sort of fake French. It's veneered surfaces. It's cheap furniture trying to look expensive. And then on the right is what Gilbert Rhodey introduced in the first year of furniture for the company. It's a completely new aesthetic. And it was very successful. The company got their loss down to $10,000 from $30,000 after just 6 months because the new furniture sold so well. Rhodey produced a variety of styles that would please a wide range of customers. At the same time, all the things he produced are pretty happy near each other, so you could mix and match and combine at will. The Chicago Tribune wrote a chair, a table, or chaise longue of his design would fit into a room done in any period of informal type. And I know I keep emphasizing that idea that you could buy something and mix it in with what you have. But in the Depression, people did not have a lot of money to spend on new furniture. So if you were buying something new, it had to be friends with what you already had. That was an important part of making furniture that people could buy. Many of the pieces that Gilbert Rhodey introduced in the early years at Herman Miller stayed in production for 5 to 10 years, which in the furniture industry is pretty remarkable. Much of Rhodey's furniture shares the Bauhaus interest in geometric purity, in simple form, and also shares Donald Desky and America's interest in sophisticated Art Deco elements. But these aren't limited production pieces for the affluent. These are for the growing middle class. And so when he combines tubular steel, he's doing it with other warmer materials so that the pieces can be edgy but also safe. He also understood that Herman Miller was a casework company. They were good at making rectangles. They made furniture. So the things he made tended to incorporate what they already could make with new elements added on that didn't require that they reinvent what they were able to do. The dresser that Rhodey introduced with the trio of cylinders and the rectangle of glass is extremely similar to something that Ruhlmann made that might have been on view at the 1925 Paris Expo, but is certainly something that Gilbert Rhodey could have been aware of at the time, and they're just too similar for me to believe that it's accidental. It's also too great of an opportunity for Rhodey to do a manufactured riff on a one-of-a-kind high-end piece of French furniture. Rhodey continued to investigate ways that tubular steel and wooden furniture could live together in harmony, and he could arrive at some sort of averaging of the extremes. And by 1939, this was a completely confident, I think refined kind of production modernism. He also standardized all of the parts. So the inside parts fit in any of the cabinets. The cabinets were rationalized so they could go up next to each other. You could create a running wall of cabinets so it looked like it was built in. And the hardware could be attached in different ways to create different effects. The important aspect of this was the modularity. This wasn't a new idea to Rhodey or to Herman Miller. Bruno Paul introduced it way back in 1905. He called it combination furniture. Herman Miller called it unit furniture. But it was a big part of what made this plan successful at Herman Miller, the flexibility of combinations. So this is the executive office group from 1942, and it shows that with just a limited handful of parts, you could get all of these different desks. I like teasing out the decorative effect that Rhodey was able to achieve with very simple parts. The cabinet on the right just changes the direction of the veneer of the wood grain on the drawers to give you a herringbone pattern. And then that disc drawer pull is attached in that V shape, in the chevron shape, to use the same part to create an overall decoration. I don't know if you remember the Ruhlmann cabinet that I showed in the Art Deco talk when I talked about his ability to create a hierarchy, but Rhodey's doing the same sort of thing without even needing any inlay work or very expensive veneering. From a distance you see a bold pattern, and when you get up close you start to see more detail. Also, this is the kind of table that you've seen everywhere, and I hope it's the kind of thing that you never really stop to wonder who introduced. There's not much to it. It's one leg used and repeat, and it's a shaped piece of glass with some holes drilled in it. And yet, think about what that allows. It allows sort of endless variance on the aesthetic. It can be shipped flat, so it's affordable. It can be mass-produced, and it's also a way to introduce a modern aesthetic to an environment with just one object. Because of Rohde's experience in advertising and marketing, he was also aware that the furniture needed to be considered from the very beginning, from its conception, with the marketing in mind. The image on the left is inviting us into that experience. We are actually the man in the chair, and we're about to be served a drink off of our new bar cart. Rohde did some other noteworthy things. He helped plan and organize the 1939 World's Fair from 1935 on, so he was an important part of its conception, and he designed a number of exhibits at the fair as well. On the left, Mrs. Modern descends from the ceiling and orders her new home, and as she's ordering things and describing them, they appear on the stage. On the right is an exhibition that shows off the properties of plexiglass, a material invented by Rohm and Haas and on view in 1939. His work with Rohm and Haas gave him access to this material when it was new, and he designed a prototype chair using a sheet of plexiglass, which is interesting to me because this is a chromed tubular steel chair, very much like any number of ones that we looked at, but it's actually no longer the new material that's being promoted. The acrylic is, the plexiglass is. This chair didn't go into production because war restrictions ended up reclaiming that material to use for the war effort. And then after the war, it was too late because in 1944, Rohde died of a heart attack at just 50 years old. We will revisit this story because his death led to a really interesting next chapter at Herman Miller that transformed office furniture. So we'll come back to that story in a couple of weeks. This could be the visual message for my day then. The beautiful Luckard chair on the left, the product of the inevitable outcome of Bauhaus innovation, paired with an American chair that is all about using the same part twice, bolting it together, hiding the joint, making it as inexpensively as possible. But I would rather end with this image because I think Gilbert Rohde's chair is a beautiful hybrid of just enough of the European savvy and sophistication and just enough of American crass marketing and price consciousness without sacrificing too much of the integrity of the finished object. So I know it was too many chairs, but I hope that you could see past that and see that this was a really interesting journey in material investigation and in sort of global conversations, which is something that will continue through the rest of this class. The next chapter, chronologically, ought to be what I call the Great American Era of Form. Just after World War II, when for a variety of reasons that we'll look at, America was able to sort of launch a new aesthetic that really still defines the era. And I think you're going to be excited to meet the objects you'll see that week and learn about why they existed. But next week I want to take another week-long sidebar and look at the development of industrial design as a profession. So it's something that I mentioned happened during the Art Deco period, and we already looked at some of the really important early industrial designers. But by looking at Henry Dreyfuss and Raymond Loewy, we can do a deep dive into the development of the methods of design, the tools that were used, the actual process, and give both of these designers a little bit more attention. If I have the stamina and you still have any patience for me, I'm hoping to record one more chapter that I just gave the title of, What About Those Funny Shaped Cars? So look for that this week as well. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time. Oh. Who wrote this? God, I've got to stand up for a minute. Office chairs are not comfortable. Okay. It's too late to be doing this. I'm sleepy. Oh God, I forgot to record the thing. There was an exhibition a few years ago that traveled and came to the RISD Museum of Marcel Breuer's furniture. And there were 4 or 5 of the B3 chair in a row. And at first I couldn't figure out why they bothered giving that much space in the exhibition to the same chair in multiples. And then I realized that these were actually the prototypes. And it was fascinating to look at how one changed from the next, because Breuer had to figure out, like, what if the legs come up in the front and then turn backwards to hold the seat? What if the legs come up in the front and turn backwards to make the armrests? What if they go sideways and are the horizontal connectors? Then what if that's putting pressure on the bottom of your leg, so we have to remove it and put a different kind of brace under the seat? You could see the development of the thought in reaching the ultimate expression of that chair. Okay, yawn. I like looking at Weber's metal furniture work.
Man, it's loud out here. There's birds, there's lawn care, there's skateboarders. There's a terrible microphone. Here are pages from the first catalog in 1937. Hey birds, knock it off. Don't you know I'm recording?
The table on the upper right is using Formica for the top surface, which is a durable... I don't know what it is. It's a resin, phenolic resin. The table on the upper right is using the new